Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us for the Sowing the Seeds for Change panel discussion that is being hosted by the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Today's discussion is part of the recently launched Safe Water for All campaign, a new educational effort to help keep the public informed on the state of water in Wisconsin. My name is Mary C. Anderson, and I am the Conservation Agriculture and Grazing Specialist for the Department of Natural Resources. My work focuses on conservation agriculture on public lands, as well as outreach to grazing farmers who help manage the department's public grasslands. For the next hour, we will focus on the emerging agriculture carbon market, what leading farmers and agriculture businesses are doing in this space, and what impacts carbon farming will have on water quality. Questions for today's question and answer session will include those from the public that we have received in advance. If anyone tuning in has additional questions for us after this session is over, please feel free to send them to this email address, dnrpress@wisconsin.gov. And we'll be sure to have an expert get in contact with you and answer your questions. Moderating today's discussion will be Sarah Walling. Sarah is the Division Administrator for Agriculture Resource Management at the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection. Prior to joining the Department of Ag, Sarah served as the director of the University of Wisconsin Extension Institute of Agriculture. Over the course of Sarah's career, she has advanced many innovations focused on bioenergy, nutrient management, and water quality. And with that, I will turn it over to Sarah. Sarah, you have the mic.
Great, thank you, Mary, and thank you to the department for providing this opportunity for me and our upcoming speakers to discuss the evolving agricultural carbon market and how it is changing the food production supply chain. Also, our opportunities that America's farmers will have to reduce their carbon footprint and what that could mean for water quality protection. In my role at the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection, I'm fortunate enough to lead a team of technical and fiscal experts that are working every day to help our state's farmers improve their cropping practices and conserve their agricultural land for generations to come. Through strong partnerships with the county land conservation departments and other private and public organizations, as well as support from our department, we now have 31 producer-led groups across our state that have stepped up to show the value that they place in soil health and water quality protection. Recognizing this grassroots movement and interest from our state citizens about the importance of our water resources, Governor Evers declared 2019 the year of clean drinking water, for us to focus on an issue facing many Wisconsinites, and that's access to safe and clean drinking water. The governor's focuses have mainly been around PFAS, lead, and nitrate. Nitrate is an essential plant nutrient that is applied as manure and fertilizer to our state's thriving agricultural lands. However, this valuable nutrient has become the state's most widespread groundwater contaminant. High levels of nitrate in drinking water have been linked to numerous human health issues. The governor has directed my agency to work closely with the DNR and the Department of Health Services to address these water quality problems through strengthened water quality standards, incentive programs, and these grassroots efforts of implementation of conservation practices to make our state's drinking water safe for all. We recognize the potential for emerging carbon markets to play a key role in addressing climate change and helping to reduce water quality impacts in agriculture in particular. By providing new revenue opportunities that allow farmers to plant crops and use nutrient and crop management practices to capture carbon, preserve soil, and improve the quality of our water. Some estimates suggest that our forested and agricultural working lands can provide between 10 and 20% of the carbon sequestration and emission reductions to reach net zero by 2050. Today's webinar focuses on this emerging opportunity And we have with us two leaders that are working in this new arena for Wisconsin agriculture, Dr. Tim Bay and Dan Smith. Tim is a professor of business development and energy finance and a state energy specialist with the University of Wisconsin. His research and educational programs serve energy industry executives, professionals, and policy leaders. Tim has over 30 years of experience in industrial and renewable energy projects and policy in education, executive, and advisory capacities. He's currently leading a new market-driven farm, carbon, and energy project here in Wisconsin, which is an effort that supports measuring, managing, and monetizing carbon at the farm level. Dan Smith is president and CEO at the Cooperative Network, which is one of the nation's largest trade organizations. Previously, he served as the division administrator for DATCAP's Division of Agricultural Development, where he directed the domestic and international market development efforts, and as CEO for Midwestern BioAg, which is a national farm supply company based in Wisconsin. And Dan currently serves as a member of our DATCAP board. Additionally, Dan has roots in farming as he and his wife owned and operated a dairy farm in northwestern Illinois for over 30 years. And he is working closely with Land O'Lakes, a member of the Co-op Network, whose subsidiary, TruTerra, launched the country's first farmer-owned carbon program, and recently the sale of carbon credits to Microsoft, who is seeking to be carbon neutral by 2030. Thank you both very much for joining us today. So to kick things off, I'm going to turn the mic over to Tim to talk to us more about agricultural carbon offsets. Tim, take it away.
Thanks, Sarah. Good early afternoon, everybody. Background. I worked on my first anaerobic digester right after writing was invented, but it taught me an awful lot. It's actually located in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I was at the Packerland packing facility. And one of the lessons that I learned from that experience was the importance of reliable information and the importance especially to both the host and the investor in the project. And throughout my experience in renewable energy projects and ag-related projects, I have found that in those circumstances where the information is reliable and can be repeated over time, the industry or the project itself, the benefits to all the stakeholders increase exponentially. When there are lots of questions involved, uncertainties, risks, it tends to be an impediment to widespread adaptation, and that all the participants involved, that their expectations are met. I think we find a situation right now, and we were having a discussion before we launched the webinar, that there appears to be a tipping point in the general population. And what I mean by that is it seems to be that sometime earlier in this year, from Wall Street in London to Swiss banking to multinational corporations to people who've been providing sustainable practices and services, all seem to have come together to reaching a consensus that now is the time, and the time for the transition and reflection of climate concerns into our economic practices has achieved a widespread acceptance. And I think the excitement surrounding soil carbon sequestration reflects that. I'm going to share just a couple of quick slides here and then transition to Dan, hear his story, and then be available for Q&A. Next slide, please. Okay, what are carbon offsets? Well, first and foremost, carbon offset is not a carbon footprint. Okay, I'll make that difference. Carbon footprint is a calculation, an estimation of how much carbon it took to produce a certain product. A carbon offset is how much carbon is reduced by a new practice. Repeat that. A carbon offset is a measured estimate of a carbon reduction when you change from one practice to another practice. Now, that offset can be used by the host, by the sponsor, by the farm to reduce their own carbon footprint, or that carbon offset can be packaged and sold to somebody else who also wants to reduce their carbon footprint. But it cannot be double counted. You can't use it for your own and then try to sell it to somebody else. These are actually legal instruments. Now, we are also having a conversation, and there's some questions about past experiences in the carbon markets and failures. Going forward, there is an incredibly high degree of interest by the financial community, by the trading community, by the corporate community, to make certain that these legal instruments are accurate and trustworthy. But they are, even at the statuses today, they are legal instruments that either reflect the removing of carbon or preventing carbon dioxide from being emitted. So one example of that is anaerobic digestion of manure. There's a difference between that, which the manure that's stored in a lagoon, and the emissions from that lagoon are not constrained and go up in the atmosphere. And if the organic matter in that manure is put into a digester, it's collected, and a portion of that emissions is made into methane and utilized elsewhere. Offsets are used to reduce the carbon footprint of the buyer. And in many cases, those buyers are corporations who file what are called environmental, societal, and governance reports. Those are sustainability metrics. And those metrics may be voluntary or they may be regulated. I'll expand on that in just a few minutes. Some other topics, some other verbiage that are often is associated with offsets, included in the next line. It's additionality. Well, what's additionality means? It means you cannot earn a carbon offset. Please stay on that one. Thank you. You cannot earn a carbon offset from existing or past practices. You can only earn a carbon offset on a new practice, a change in your own practices. That's the concept of additionality, something new. The value of that offset in large way is determined by how permanent that change is going to be. So the course of discussion around soil carbon is there's lots of discussion about tillage practices, land use practices directly. And there's also a fair amount of questions about how permanent is the carbon that's reduced, how permanent does it stay in the soil? And a third common term is certification or verification. And that is the process by either the buyer or the marketer of the carbon offset requiring the farm to go through a process of verifying, in fact, are they making changes and what are the impacts of those changes? And right now, those verification practices vary. Soil carbon. I've already covered land use-based practices and the verification. There's one issue that is becoming an increasingly important one, is that these practices vary to a large degree by the location of where the practice is, by the past land use, by weather conditions, and what end up being future land use issues. Okay, it's the desire by the industry is to keep it pretty simple. The reality is the more we understand it, unfortunately, to a large degree, a lot more complication is eking in. What's driving all this? Next slide, please. What's driving this is terms called greenhouse gas protocols. All right, so there are a number of international institutions that have set up these protocols. And those protocols address three different primary activities. Scope one. Scope 1 is for any entity, whether that's a factory or a farm or a household or an institution, is what direct emissions originate from that facility. That's scope 1. It's pretty easy to measure and to manage. It's what's going out the smokestacks or coming out of your lagoon. Scope 2 is what's the carbon embedded in the power, the fuels that you buy from somebody else and you use at your facility or your home. That includes the electricity you buy, the fuels you buy, the steam you heat your factory with, the gas you use to heat your home or dry your grain. Scope 3 is the sticky wicket. That is the carbon embedded in the goods and services from your supply chain. That requires, in order to measure that requires you to go backwards to contact your suppliers, your vendors, and ask them to do carbon accounting like you're doing carbon accounting. And it's one of the more challenging aspects of getting a handle on all this emissions issues and putting value to changes. But these are the primary 3 areas of concern that buyers of carbon offsets are trying to address. They can change practices in their scope 1. They can do a fuel switch or a supplier switch or put in solar cells, a solar array to address scope 2. Scope 3 tends to be the biggest part of their carbon footprint, and that's where the offsets are typically applied. Next slide, please. Well, what's driving this? Well, this corporate sustainability, this ESG reporting has been has had a monumental impact on this industry. These are primarily have been historically the result of shareholder initiatives. And that is that shareholders of the companies pool their resources and then offer agenda items at a corporate meeting saying, we want XYZ company to start doing sustainability reporting and start taking practices and efforts to reduce their carbon footprint. This has happened widespread throughout most of the large institutions, the large corporate institutions globally. Over 90% now of the Fortune 500 files these ESG reports. Over 98% of the institutional investors, pension funds and private equity, now read these reports and make decisions based upon these ESG reports. What also happened was about 3-4 years ago, the insurance company, the secondary, the reinsurers, those who take mortgages and insurance policies and then bundle them, the AIG is a good example of that. They went to some of these shareholder initiative organizations and says, you know what, we're tired of paying out claims due to climate. We need to get on board here. And when that happened, the rest of the large financial institutions and the exchanges all started adopting ESG reporting. And it's had a cascading effect. Prior to that, government regulation was really driving the bus. Okay, there's been a cap and trade program in Europe for quite a while. There's a cap and trade program in California and the West Coast. There's one in the East Coast. In other areas where kind of like they're placeholders or examples in the United States is the renewable fuel standard. That addresses liquid fuels. It holds the oil companies obligated, and that they have to blend ethanol and other biofuels into their stream in order to meet standards. But the EPA adopted these kind of like the general classes. They got 5 classes of biofuels. And if the fuel was certain within a range, that's how it was regulated. California took this one step much further, is they developed what's called the low carbon fuel standard. And that's where biogas, for those of you involved in dairy, and those of you that are aware of the the digester technology and the industry, there's a lot of biogas going from the Midwest and from the Southwest into California to meet this low carbon fuel standard. And California determines its calculations based on the carbon intensity of the fuel. Now, I'm not going to crawl down the rabbit hole and all the methodology behind that, but it's a performance standard. The lower the carbon intensity, the more the benefit back to the developers and the producers of the biogas. Last, but definitely not least, is consumer expectations. Consumer expectations are what inform shareholder initiatives. Consumer expectations then doubled down when the corporate sustainability started happening, and now it's become a major driver. Carbon labeling is probably something we're going to see universally within the next 10 years. Next slide, please. All right, well, expectations from the future. So this slide kind of like summarizes what's involved in this soil carbon sequestration. There's an input, residuals, mulch, composting, et cetera, changing tillage practices, and then what comes out of the soil. This is a standard representation of what this idea is all about. Next slide. This is more like reality. Right. The reality is that the concept of soil carbon sequestration has been well known in agronomy circles for a very long time. There have been practices, and Dan was the CEO of a leading edge vendor in this space. But the reality is the ability to monetize value of soil carbon sequestration and have that information be trusted and reliable over time is still a question mark. The interest has never been higher. I have never in my entire career have I experienced this degree of excitement and interest in this particular area. But one of the areas, one of the good takeaways is in spite of us not having it really locked down yet, understanding what practices result in what kind of soil carbon sequestration. The benefit of this is all of the practices that are attempting to do this, quality and water quality. And one of the areas that we're working on very carefully is to understand in conservation practices, soil health practices, can we double dip? Can we still get the support from the programs and from the production incentives to doing so, and then add on soil carbon sequestration above and beyond that? And that's the jury's still out. I got a couple seconds more, Sarah? Okay, next slide then, real quick. We're talking about a Wisconsin program. I'm only gonna hit a couple little highlights. Next slide, please. Okay, we're investigating a state-sanctioned and sponsored initiative to evaluate and act as a clearinghouse for the existing providers, existing marketers of soil carbon services. There's a short list here: Indigo Ag, Ecosystem Services, Nori, and part of that program is, in the short term, act as a clearinghouse and a facilitator. In the longer term, actually start to investigate what, with certainty and reliability, what kind of soil carbon pricing can we accomplish. Next slide, please. There is a concern that the science and the motivation by the industry aren't quite in sync. And yet I for one, in my own opinion, value and recognize the initiatives of those who are early entries into this, because they're trying to do the right thing. And they should not be criticized, in my opinion, too harshly, even if the science isn't locked down. But over time, we should be looking at, one, reducing the barriers to entry for landowners who want to participate, but be truthful and honest that over time, we should improve the science and we should improve the value of the carbon offsets. But in the short term, they should understand the risks involved. The goal of our effort is to have what's called a dynamic pricing model. Well, what does that really mean? It really means that the best practices earn the best results, and that the older the carbon is in the soil, the higher the value over time. And with that, I think I'll pass the baton to Dan. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tim. That was very helpful. Dan, I know you didn't have any slides prepared, so I'm just going to pass the mic over to you to talk a little bit about what your role at the Co-op Network has been in this space and some of the initiatives that you're here to talk to us about today that your enterprise has been working with and around related to this to help our state better understand our potential.
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Tim, for that very informative presentation. Tim made this statement that was something about now being the time. And that's a great lead into my remarks today, because what I want to have is just a conversation with you about what we are seeing. And now is the time where the energy, the interest, the engagement in dealing with climate change, water, carbon is just increasing every day. And I'm very happy to be here today and have the chance to share what our cooperatives are doing at the ground level in this field. When you look at cooperatives throughout history, they have always aligned and acted in response to emerging economic, social, and cultural opportunities and challenges. Cooperatives have a strong track record of finding solutions, building coalitions, and responding during critical times. So today, the impact and threats of a changing climate have placed us in just such a critical time. Every day, the news presents the dramatic, the wildfires out west and recently in the Boundary Waters canoe area, devastating hurricanes in the south, obviously, with extended flooding and damage far inland, record heat waves in areas not normally prone to them, and along with the resulting depletion of water vital to agriculture and our population centers. But we really need to look beyond the headlines and the videos of these dramatic weather events to see the real work of addressing climate change that is going on across multiple industries and throughout our rural communities. So Cooperative Network, with an association that I lead, represents and supports over 225 cooperatives from a dozen business sectors across Wisconsin and Minnesota. So we consider ourselves the voice of cooperatives, and our members are essential components of the rural community. Our cooperatives rely on a strong, vibrant, healthy rural environment and economy. And all of our members are experiencing the negative effects of climate change. And these come in various forms, such as increased risk for our insurance and financial cooperatives, changes in supply and demand for our energy cooperatives, the shifting rural populations and the resulting demands for healthcare, housing, and social services for all of our rural communities. And a recent New York Times article just identified climate change as one of the leading causes for the decline of at-risk rural communities. Once homes, businesses, infrastructure, and civic services have been disrupted by severe weather events, it often becomes impossible to rebuild, restart, and repopulate. So climate change is a global problem. The cooperatives have a global reach. There are 3 million cooperatives in the world with a combined membership of 1 billion people. That's 12% of humanity. And unlike the private sectors, cooperatives are governed by 7 cooperative principles, which ensure the democratic adoption of policy and programs. This means the cooperative members, those who belong to the cooperative, who purchase its products and services, can decide by vote the governing policies of the cooperative. And Tim pointed out on one of his slides, the voice of the consumer, the energy that is putting in and demanding accountability from different industries. Well, cooperatives are uniquely set up for that because it's actually the consumer of the products and services of the cooperative that drives the policies of the cooperatives, and they do so through a democratic vote. And one of those 7 cooperative principles is concern for community. So this is a way of saying that we're all in this together. It's not what is good for any individual, it's what is good for the community that matters. So when we consider the broad and overwhelming reach of climate change, it is clear that community means the human community, the community of planet Earth, the community we all share and must protect. In recognition of all of this, the International Cooperative Alliance has named the year 2020 Cooperatives for Climate Change. That is the theme of their year. And they stated that we need to realize that our common home is in danger. There are methods of production and consumption that are constantly attacking the environment, and we don't have much time to reverse this situation. At Cooperative Network, all of our cooperative sectors rely on agriculture as the foundation of the rural Midwest and the communities in which they operate. Our farm agricultural cooperatives see firsthand from the ground up the impacts of a changing climate. Record rain events, increased pest and weed pressure, disruption in the processing and distribution channels, and extended interruptions in farm operations have become the norm. And so, as in the past when facing other threats, cooperatives are responding. If we look back in the mid-1980s, in the midst of the most severe farm economic crisis since the Great Depression, a small group of farmers gathered in southwestern Wisconsin to lay the foundation for what we know today as Organic Valley, a $1.2 billion international cooperative today. Along with Organic Valley's marketing structure came strict adherence to agronomy and livestock programs aimed at improved soil, animal, and consumer health. At the
Uh-oh, did we lose Dan?
It appears we have.
Okay, well, as a little bit of, we'll kind of segue over to a couple of questions, I think, Tim, that I think would be placed in your court anyway, although I'm sure Dan will have something to add to it potentially if he's able to come back in for us. But, one of the most effective ways to improve water quality is through this long-term regenerative agricultural practice shift. Our farmers in the Midwest, we recognize, have perhaps the best chance to benefit from selling carbon offsets because of our soils and climate and the reliable precipitation that we tend to receive here in this part of the country. So given that and the numerous incentive programs that we have in this state and across the nation to motivate farmers to adopt more soil health and water quality improvement practices, how do you feel participation in carbon markets is different than those incentive programs? And do you believe that carbon markets could motivate and help more farmers to convert to sequestering more carbon and keeping more soil in place and covered?
All right. So my initial response to the question is this, Sarah. The existing programs have been primarily designed to address soil and water quality and conservation practices. And I do not see these as mutually exclusive programs by any stretch. Dan, I'll let you I'll wrap up the response here and you can.
That sounds great.
All right. In terms of in terms of agronomy practices, we have a much shorter history in this arena. And there's been a lot of really good initiatives. We grow great grass here. We grow perennial crops in the upper Midwest pretty darn well. So it's going to be a two-edge effort on this. Is that one, if the perennial systems sequester more carbon, then we have to be more creative of how we use perennial systems to meet our own food and fiber needs. The second part of that question is, though, that a lot of farming operations also have timber run or have marginal cropland that is possibly well suited for timber. And in the timber arena, this carbon sequestration issues, there's a lot longer history, and there's more science behind that.
Mhm.
So any operator, any enterprise out there that also has timber ground is interested in this, that would be an equally appropriate area to investigate.
Great.
Is how do you manage your timber ground and possibly, silviculture to meet my carbon needs, my carbon objectives.
Maximizing participation with the diverse land types that a farm
You
might
bet.
own and operate. Great.
You
Thank
bet.
you.
All right.
Dan, looks like we have you back. Are you there and ready to continue where you left off?
I am so sorry for that.
That's
My
okay.
internet must have cut out. I think in interest of time, I'm just going to fast forward instead of trying to go back and pick up where I was. I think I did lay out I'll summarize my earlier points, that cooperatives are uniquely positioned because of their structure and their work in their rural communities to be addressing this situation from the ground level up. So I think I'll fast forward to, and again, I apologize, so the work of some of our cooperatives. I was talking about Organic Valley, how their program for 40 years has really been organic biological agriculture that we talk a lot about now as being one of the things that we really need to incorporate into agricultural practices. GrowMark, which is another one of Cooperative Network's valued members, is collaborating with a Boston area startup that Tim had on one of his slides, Indigo Ag. And it's to establish high quality carbon credits as a new cash crop for farmers. Their goal is to leverage nature and technology to unlock economic and environmental progress. They recognize the potential for this expanded carbon market that Tim was referring to. And under this collaboration, GrowMark's network of farm cooperatives can really help farmers navigate this complex soil carbon market. And that really goes back to my earlier points about, because of the history of these cooperatives in the area at the ground level, they are on site, they have the trust, the experience to work with the farmers to make these types of changes. So GrowMark and Indigo, their plan is to collaborate to provide farmers the support they need to enter this carbon marketplace. And they have the existing retail sectors, the consultants, and the relationship with farmers to really move this forward rapidly. So Indigo will leverage its advanced capabilities for measuring and verifying on-farm environmental impacts and really translate the farmers' efforts into a new source of revenue in form of the carbon credits. So this is an example of combining the extensive experience of a well-established farm cooperative with emerging and impacting technology. The end result has the potential to be a revenue boost for farmers while making a positive impact in the fight against climate change. I'd also like to talk about another leader in the field, Land O'Lakes, another one of Cooperative Network's valued members, and a century-old agricultural cooperative with a strong history of leading change in farmer engagement. Land O'Lakes touches in some way 1/3 of all the farm land acres in the United States, either through their seed or their processing or their fertilizer program. So you can see when you're scaling up now to a level to really make a difference if you're touching 1/3 of all the acres in the United States. And Land O'Lakes has launched a program called True Terra as the only farmer-owned, farmer-driven sustainability program in the nation. It aims to scale on-farm stewardship by working with and through the existing local Land O'Lakes cooperatives, much the same way as GrowMark does. You're already in the community, you're already on the farm. So you've got your foot on the ground, so to say. Beyond this relationship with the farmer, True Terra wants to collaborate with conservation groups, government agencies such as DATCAP and the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, value chain partners to create new opportunities for these added value markets through the adoption of more sustainable farming practices, such as Tim was laying out in his slides. This combination of cutting edge technology into the agronomy and the animal nutrition level is really what is, I think, drawing so much attention from farmers. This really allows the farmer to work within the system they're already comfortable with, the people they're already using as agronomists and nutritionists on their farm, and then bring on the new platform of technology, which allows them to create benchmarks, document their success. As Tim mentioned, that you have to kind of start where you are today. You can't go back, so you need a benchmark formed. And then you can verify, track your improvements going forward. That is where the new technology and the precision agriculture really comes in at the farm level. As part of True Terrace program, there's the True Carbon program, which represents the industry's first and only farmer-driven program to help unlock soil carbon. This program really works field by field to make the improvements based on science-based protocols and standards, and then use that data, that new technology, to track, to benchmark, to verify the value of the changes that they have made. The clean water part is a primary goal of the True Terra program and for Land O'Lakes as a cooperative. They're working in the Big Pine watershed of the Wabash River in Indiana, Cedar River Watershed Partnership in Minnesota, and the Canyon River Watershed also in Minnesota. So now we are seeing real life examples of how a forward-thinking cooperative with a national and international reach, 100 years of experience in relationships, can now partner with local conservation groups, government agencies, and the farmers to really drive change and collaboration. And I don't want to leave you with the impression that cooperatives are doing all the heavy lifting in this area. General Mills is working with their growers for their cereal grains to implement regenerative agricultural practices, along with the required traceability and verification platforms. Bayer is actively enrolling farmers on multiple continents in a digital marketplace to reward farmers for sustainable farming practices. Many farmers are already using no-till, strip-till, cover cropping, other sustainable practices on their farm, and their agronomists have been working with them on those programs for a long, long time. So partnerships and private industry have been formed with cooperatives to really develop the precise technology that is required for this very ground level work that we are doing. And I just conclude now, and then we can get to our questions. Decades ago, the writer and farmer Wendell Berry wrote an essay where he said that if we really wanted to advance conservation and regenerative agriculture practices, it had to be monetized in some way, that the farmer needed to see it as a revenue stream. And it was quite a controversial position to take at that time. But now we are really looking at how our cooperatives and the conservation groups and private industry and government agencies are venturing into that model and seeing conservation as having a reward potential for all of us, and making these types of change, this type of change, actually reward and enhance farm revenue. And I think that's a very important part of this very scientific discussion that we have to talk. So again, I apologize for my internet choosing today to flicker out, but I'm going to stop talking and we'll take your questions. And again, thank you, Tim, for allowing me to be on today with you.
Thank you, Dan. That was very helpful and really informative. I appreciated some of the examples from some of those corporate entities that is working with your organization and beyond. It gives everybody a little bit more of a firmer grasp of how this is working on the ground these days. With that said, of course, as Tim alluded to earlier, previous attempts, well over a decade ago, to develop carbon markets in the US were not very successful in the long term, at least here in this nation. How is this model different now? And what are the preliminary indicators that you would use to measure its success, especially as it might pertain to Wisconsin? Tim, why don't you go ahead?
Shot at
First?
that.
Yeah, why don't you?
Okay. Today, when the Chicago Climate Exchange was established, approximately 2005, I believe, 2004, 2005, it was driven primarily by the North Dakota Farmers Union and changing practices in North Dakota, and it was established in Chicago. It was about the same time where the California markets started to get established as well. Chicago one was voluntary. The California one was not. And as a result of the lack of a cap and trade program at a federal level, Chicago died. I had 2 contracts, I lost money. What's happened today is that the scope and scale, the number of participants involved in this, and the general attitude and approach to changing practices, and in changing practices being monetized, getting paid to change practices, is a lot broader. There's a huge difference between the two. I would say though, that attitude is really exuberant at the moment, and that the better that, especially us who are really embedded in this and really interested in having it succeed, that we don't have rose-colored glasses on, and also understand the distinction between additionality and sustainability. In that, there's another question in here is, how do we ensure that smaller operations also benefit from these practices? Well, they may not have as many opportunities to generate offsets, but in terms of labeling, in terms of carbon accounting, they may be way ahead of the game here. So one of the first things that they should do is they should contact their customers and contact their trade organization and find out, do you have a program that I can enroll in where I can calculate the carbon footprint of my grass-fed beef operation? It may not earn an offset, but what it will do is reflect past practices and current practices and give you insight that you can then communicate to your buyers what your carbon footprint is.
Excellent. Thank you. Dan, do you have anything to add?
I wanted to ask, I'm going to toss this question back to Tim based on what he just said. You know, if you compare where we are today to 2005 or so, there seems to be so much more support from the financial investment community and so much emerging technology to support, verify, trace than we had before. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement. So typically with one of the vendors, Indigo, Novi, Terra, they'll, when you're enrolled, you'll fill out a form about past land use practices and current practices, as well as what you anticipate that land to be used for again in the future. That will be a baseline. Then there'll be a satellite survey of the acreage you've enrolled. And then after the practices, you'll be expected to report the progress, provide feedback. Every program's different, so don't expect to see the same input from Novi as you're going to see from Indigo, as you're going to see from EcoMarket. They all have their different programs. But in general, they'll do a second pass by satellite at the end of the growing season. And based upon that satellite imagery, they'll either confirm or ask for additional verification of, did you do in fact what you said you were going to do? There, at least some part of that contract, there will be an on-site inspection as well. And who pays for that inspection gets negotiated or determined in the contract itself. And that will involve soil samples and looking at the carbon nature of the nature of this. Hopefully, as this goes on, there'll be a lot more room for self-verification. There'll be a lot more policies and procedures where you as the landowner can do a lot of this to enhance the verification, because it's a critical element here. I mean, in some cases, and Dan's reference on the Land O'Lakes program, that's a very generous offer at $20, okay? Because others don't offer anywhere near the $20 one. And yet, if you can have a program, let's talk about not land use, but let's say it's a manure or nutrient management, you can earn an awful lot more than $20 for an offset, multiples more than $20 for an offset. So it's complicated right now, all right? Hopefully in time, the more companies, the more people involved in this, the simpler and more widely spread these type of programs will become.
Thank you for that. So, based on that and trying to position ourselves and our farmers, the next question is, what can we be doing as a state right now to best position ourselves as a state and our farmers to best be able to take advantage of emerging carbon markets? And kind of a side question on that is, what needs to happen at the national level? Is that something that needs to happen first in order for us as a state to engage more? And what do you see as a role for the state agencies in particular, but state government as a whole, to facilitate expansion of markets into our state in a productive and successful way?
Dan, go ahead.
Well, we started early on trying to close the gaps between public and private, and introducing some of these ideas and the partners in the field to the leaders in the state agencies across the states. So I don't think it's an either or question. I think it has to come from multiple directions. I don't think that this can wait for a national response, but I think it will grow into a national type of program. Tim mentioned before in one of his slides, that you have to be, if I understood you correctly, cognizant of the different types of agriculture, climate, soils, practices across the country. This isn't a one size fits all industry. But one thing that I've been really interested in, and maybe it's because Cooperative Network works in the upper Midwest in 2 states, are regional partnerships, because I think it gives you, these issues don't end at the state line, but this kind of an upper Midwest type of an idea where we do hold a lot in common with Iowa, Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, that kind of thing. I think when you get out west into the Dakotas, you get a little different type of agriculture and those types of things. And we do have very good examples in the past of state agencies leading in the organic field. The state agencies played a big role in helping to support the growth of organic agriculture and local and regional food agriculture. So I do think we have a good track record of private-public partnerships on a regional basis. Coalitions may be being built between the states in those areas, and then the overall impact grows, and eventually you're looking at a national imprint that has multiple different sectors in it relating to the particular parts of that sector.
I'd add to that is a couple different steps. Number one, whoever buys your product, ask them if they're aware of this. Do they have a program? Are their customers asking for this information? Number two, if you're involved in any trade or industry group, Farm Use Union, Farm Bureau, DBA, professional dairy producers, et cetera, contact them. Express an interest in learning more. Third, you've heard it from many, but there's no substitute from a phone call or a letter to your assembly person or your senator asking what they know about these topics and what their interest is. Without talking too much about what's going on in the Capitol level, I can assure everybody listening in today, there is a fair amount of activity and a lot of questions going on right now that will lead into the next session and will probably influence our next election cycle. But a squeaky wheel gets oil.
True enough. Thank you. Well, that is a wrap up of all of our questions from the day. Any last remarks that either one of you, Dan, would you want to go first? Anything you'd want to add at the end here before I pass the mic back over to Mary to tie us up?
I really appreciated Tim's last remark because it gives me an opportunity to elaborate on that. You know, Cooperative Network exists to support cooperatives and give cooperatives in rural communities a voice in government. And he's exactly right. There is a lot of conversation, a lot of debate going on in the State House in Madison and the State House in St. Paul, where we spend the majority of our time. And we should never take for granted that those making decisions understand all of this or have a background in agriculture, a background in the rural communities, or an understanding of the difference between a cooperative and a privately held business. It takes work. You have to show up every day and you have to have the voice. I said that we were the voice of cooperatives. We hope to be a voice in this conversation. We intend to be a voice in this conversation going forward as well. And thank you, Sarah, and all of your colleagues at DETCAP and at the DNR for the work that you're doing in this as well.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that. Tim, anything from you?
Thank you for the opportunity. Please contact DNR about any follow-up questions that you may have. And if you're seriously interested in this, contact me or contact Dan about potential vendors. But the phone call to the assembly person or the senator, your timing is exquisite if you were to place that soon.
So what I'm hearing is engagement is key. Now is a great time to act in that way, to keep your eye out to things, as I'm finding things are constantly evolving and growing, and new concepts surrounding this continue to kind of pop up into my email inbox quite often these days. So looking forward to watching that grow and expand over time. Thank you both extremely sincerely for your time today. Appreciate you being here to talk to us about this, and everyone online watching. Thank you all for being here as well. And with that, I will pass it back to Mary C. Anderson to close us up from the DNR's perspective. Mary?
What a great session. It's so appreciated that you guys shared all this wonderful information. Please join us on September 15th at 11 a.m. for Threats on Tap, Marginalized Communities at Risk. While the Safe Drinking Water Act guarantees all Wisconsinites access to clean, drinkable water, not everyone can safely turn on the tap. The United States has a remarkable water system developed over 2 centuries of technical, institutional, and economic advances. However, the benefits of those systems have not been equally felt across the state. Water systems that serve marginalized communities, communities of color, low income, and rural communities are more likely to be unsafe. Hear about those efforts to understand and how to secure safe and affordable drinking water for every community. Our speakers will include Brenda Coley with Milwaukee Water Commons, Margaret Ann Noonan, Director of Electa Quinney Institute for American Indian Education, Maria Redmond with the Office of Sustainability and Clean Energy, and Regina Strong with Michigan's Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. We'll see you on September 15th.